Baruch Hashem. Today's Yomi is Zevachim Daf Daled. Zevachim 4. Today's Daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. Daf Yomi tells us on the top of Daled Amid Alf, Minao and Deba'inan Zvicha Lashma. How do we know that the sacrifice of the Korban, the Zvicha, has to be done with the right intent? So what's the question here? Rashi says, the idea is, how do we know that initially speaking, that this is the best way to do it? Rashi says, what about the pasuk that we cited earlier that tells us that if you deviate, it's still going to be that if you don't do it exactly what your intent was, that it's kosher, but you have not fulfilled your obligation. Avodos. There it doesn't say each specific one. And others have pointed out, Rashi is also saying, not only does it not say each specific avoda, but also we don't know that ideally that we know that b'di'evet you haven't fulfilled your obligation, but how do we know that this is the right way to do it? So that's another question that another point that's being made here, that when it comes to a korban, that the ideal way to do it is you have to have the proper intent for each one of the four services that make up the korban. As a background, we could say that there are four essential parts to the korban. There's the shchita, the slaughter, the kabbalah, the receiving of the blood, the holacha, the conveying of the blood to the mizbeach, and the zrika, and the sprinkling of the blood on the altar. The zrika is the essential element in order for kapara to be attained, for atonement to be attained. So they asked the Gemara, how do we know that the sacrifice needs to be done with the right intent? It says if the zevach shlamim will be his offering. And the word zevach there is extra, so it means that the korban, that the slaughter needs to be done for the purpose of the shlamim. Gemara says, the Gemara says, well, maybe the actual name of the korban is Zevach Shlamim, not Shlamim, but Zevach Shlamim. Gemara says that's not the case. I mean, Hamakriv es Dam Shlamim, or Hazorek es Dam Shlamim, it calls it the blood of the Shlamim, below Ksiv Zevach, and doesn't call it as Dam Zevach Shlamim. Ksiv Zevach, and here it's written Zevach, Shema Mina Shetei Zvicha L'Shem Shlamim. You see from here that the Zvicha needs to be done for the purpose of the shlamim. So the Gemara is going to go through all four of the avodas and know how do we know that all four of them need to be done with Shema. Ashkacha and Zevicha, okay, we know that the slaughtering needs to be done with Shema. Shar avodos we know, and how do we know that the kabbalah, the receiving of the blood, has to be done with Shema? If you want to say, well, we're now kabbalah from Zvicha, no, you can't, because Malas Vicha Shekein Nifseles Shelo Hashem Ochlin B'Pesach. Zevicha has a stringency that if you slaughtered the korban Pesach by a shlamim, if you slaughtered it for something that was not for somebody who was capable of eating, let's say they're too sick or too elderly, so then it's going to be a disqualified offering, and that's not the case by the other avodos. So therefore, you can't learn out the other avodos from Zvicha. El Amar Kra, so it's learned out from Hamakri Vestama Shlamim. And the word Hakrava here, Rashi tells is referring to the Kabbalah. So Kriva is the Kabbalah Sadam, the receiving of the blood. So it says when it brings the blood of the Shlamim, which teaches us that Tehei Kabbalah L'Shem Shlamim, the receiving of the blood has to be done for the purpose of the Shlamim. Gemara says, V'uchto Rachmana B'Kabbalah, so the Torah could just write it down by Kabbalah, V'leilav Shlita Minah. And why wouldn't we learn out the shchita from Kabbalah? The Gemara says no, because Kabbalah has a stringency, mishum de'iko and mifrach, because you could challenge the Kabbalah if you would want to learn it out from Kabbalah to shchita. Excuse me. You could learn it out by saying Mala Kabbalah shekem psua bazar. The Isha, the Kabbalah has a stringency. The receiving of the blood is not kosher if it will be done by a non-Kohen or a woman. A non-Kohen or a woman can do the shlita. There's a whole question here about the actual girsi or the text, if the woman is included here, or if a woman is anyways included in a zar in the statement of a non-Kohen, but that's a question between our printing Gemara. And the Shita Mikubetzes doesn't have the text that says Isha, but that's for a different discussion. So we could say that Kabbalah is disqualified by a non-Kohen and a woman. And so therefore you can't learn from Kabbalah to Shlita. So now we're on the Daladam and Aleph around 10 lines down. The Gemara is going through how we know we need Lishma by each of the 4 items of that make up a korban, that make up the essentialness of the korban. So as the Gemara Ashkechan, we prove that we need Lishma by Shlita and Kabbalah, Zrika Minon. And the Gemara skips over halacha. How do we know we need it? By sprinkling. If you want to say, well, learn out the sprinkling needs to be Lishma from Shlita and Kabbalah, you can't learn out from there. Why? Malahani Shekain no Tzafon. Those two, the Shlita and the Kabbalah, are required to be done in the northern part of the courtyard of the temple. And also they have another element which is different from them, from Zrika. Yeshnan b'chataos hapnimios. They also apply even to those karbanos, those rare karbanos that are brought inside the sanctuary itself. The chatos apnimios, whereas the Zrika doesn't apply in those areas. So therefore they have a stringency that Zrika doesn't have. So how do we know that Zrika needs a Shema? Elam Akrah, Zorek as Dam HaShlamim. One who sprinkles the blood of the Shlamim. Shetei Zriko Shev Shlamim. There's an extra word there. Could have just said Azorek as Adam. From the fact that it says in the pasuk Azorek as Dam HaShlamim, teaches us that the Zrika needs to be done for the purpose of Shlamim. So now we go back to Allah. So now, why doesn't the Torah just write it by Zrika and we learn out from Zrika to Shlita and Kabbalah? No, you can Mishum Deiko Mifrach, because you could challenge it by saying Zrika is different. Zar Misa, because if a Zar does the sprinkling, if a non-Kohen does the sprinkling, he gets death from heaven, whereas the Shlita and the Kabbalah, he doesn't. It's prohibited for the Zar is prohibited to do the Kabbalah. He doesn't get death. So the Gemara says, Misa Ashkechan. Excuse me. Shekin Chayv Zar Misa Ashkechan Kuhu. Okay, we find these other 3 that they have to be Lishma. Now let's go back to halacha minon. How do we know that the conveying of the blood from the receptacle to the altar, how do we know that that requires Lishma? Shekein avoda she afshar levatla. So if you want to say, let's learn it out from the fact that the other 3 require it, you can't learn it out from there because malakula, because all the others are shekein avoda she afshar levatla. All the others are an avoda; they're a service that it's impossible to nullify. And so therefore it means to say you can't have a kosher korban without Shlita, Kabbalah, and Zrika, but it is possible. But Tomer Balacha She'efshar, it's possible that you could slaughter the animal right by the Mizbeach, and then you wouldn't require any halacha because it wouldn't be necessary. So therefore you can't learn it out from them to the halacha. Elam Akra V'Kriv Pesakol HaMizbecha, and it says in the pasuk you should bring. The Kohen is going to bring everything towards the altar. And we learned that this is referring to the bringing of the limbs to the ramp of the altar. And it also says v'ikrivu is the receiving of the blood. And the Torah tells us that Kabbalah is said in using an expression of conveying v'ikrivu to teach us to tell us that halacha, even though the pasuk earlier we cited was about bringing the limbs and not necessarily the blood, but here we're going to say it's to tell us that in general the halacha of the blood is like Kabbalah. So just like Kabbalah requires lishma, also the conveying of the blood to the altar requires lishma. Just should point out what is the essential part of the korban. The essential part is the sprinkling of the blood, because that is where the kapara, that's where the atonement is attained. All the other parts are also essential, the shchita, the kabbalah, the halacha, and the zrika, but it's all leading us towards the sprinkling of the blood. So now the Gemara has gone through how every single aspect of the carbon, the four essential aspects, the Shlita, Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika require Lishma. That's by Shinoi Kodesh that you require. But what about Shinoi Balim, meaning to say you slaughtered it, a person had designated the carbon and you slaughtered it with the intent of fulfilling another person's obligation. How do we know that that's also insufficient to fulfill the obligation? Ashkechan Shinoi Kodesh, we find that if you change the Kodesh, that you haven't fulfilled the obligation and you require Lishma. Shinoi Balim, and how do we know that you also, if you change the owner, how do we know that you need to slaughter it with the intent that this person should achieve atonement and not somebody else? So how do we know that? So the Gemara says, Amar Pinchas Breder Rav Ami Amar Kra Ubasar Zevach Todas Shulamav. It says in the pasuk, in the flesh of the Zevach Todas Shulamav, which means Sheitei Zvicho Hashem Toda, that the sacrifice has to be done for the purpose of the Toda, the purpose of the Thanksgiving offering, and Kodesh, and we don't need it for Shinoi Kodesh because we already know that it has to be done with Shema for the purpose of the Shlamim. The Navko Mehasim, because we already learned it out above, we just said Mizdevach Shlamim. But if that's the case, the Neo Inyan was Shinoi Balim. So then we should apply it to say that if you did it for the wrong owner, you don't fulfill your obligation. Gemara says, wait 1 second. Is that what this pasuk is teaching us? Don't we need like the following brisa? Ubasar zevach todos shlamav. What does that mean? Avachanin omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Baal made toda sheshachto shleim shlamim kshera shlamim sheshachto shleim toda psula. Isn't that pasuk needed to teach us that if you slaughtered a toda for the purpose of a shlamim, it's kosher, but if you slaughtered a shlamim for the purpose of the toda, it's disqualified. A toda is more specific than a shlamim. So if somebody designated a shlamim and then you change it to a toda, it's no good. But a toda that you change to a shlamim is okay. That's what we need the pasuk for. So the Gemara says, "Ma'afresh ben zelazeh." And what's the distinction? Toda kruya shlamim, because the Thanksgiving offering is also called a shlamim. Main shlamim kruyim toda, and the shlamim is not called a toda. So we can use the pasuk for that. So the Gemara says, yeah, we can, because anan mi zevach kamrinan. We're learning it out from the word ubasar zevach toda shalom. That you need to have the right owner in mind. So now the Gemara says, "Vakatimi baile," but don't we still need the word zevach to teach us chatos v'ashem minayin? How do we know that a chatos and ashem, that it says in the Torah Kohanim by this pasuk, Rashi says, "Ubasar zevach todos shavav biyom karbano yechal." This teaches us that the toda is eaten has to be in that day and night. How do we know that also the chatos and the asham have to be in that day and night? Tamomar zevach. So we use the word zevach to teach us that the chatos and the asham have to be in the same time limit as the toda. So we can't use it to teach us shinoi ba'alam. So the Gemara says no. Im kein nechtov kra ubasar toda shlamav zevach. My zevach. Why does it say ubasar zevach todas shlamav? Shema minatarti. To teach us both of these limudim, both shinoi ba'alam and the law of the chatas and the asham. So just like we went through all 4 avodos by the shinoi kachim, we're now going to go through the other 3 avodos by shinoi ba'alam. Ashkechon zvicha. We know that if you change the intent by the slaughtering of a carbon, you change the intent of the owner, it's not sufficient. Shar avodos we know. And how do we know the other avodos? The Kabbalah, the Zrika, and the Halacha. I'm going to say, let's just learn that from Zvicha. You can. Why? Like we said above, it's disqualifying if you slaughter for a person who can't eat it by the Korban Pesach. So the Gemara says, well, Nemar Zvicha b'Shinoi Kodesh, and Nemar Zvicha b'Shinoi Ba'am. Well, since it says the word Zvicha by Shinoi Kodesh, and the pasuk we said at the beginning of the daf, and Shinoi Ba'alim by the pasuk we just cited, Ma Zvicha Mur b'Shinoi Kodesh lo chalakta ben Zvicha shvar avodos, Az Zvicha Mur b'Shinoi Ba'am lo chalak ben Zvicha shvar avodos. So we say, well, just like by Zvicha by Shinoi Kodesh, it applies to all 4. So also by Shinoi Ba'am, it should apply to all 4. No, we can break that. Says Mariko Mifrach, Mal Shinoi Kodesh. Shinoi Kodesh is different. She came psula begufo because it's inherently disqualified if you have a wrong intent for the korban, the wrong korban in mind, and the yeshno ba'arva. So first of all, you can't compare it because shinoi kodesh is inherently disqualified, and also yeshno ba'arva avodos, v'yeshno la'achar misa, v'yeshno b'tzibur yachid, and also we have other issues that are between the shinoi kodesh and the shinoi ba'am, and the second one is that it is yeshno ba'arba avodos, that it is applies to all four of the avodos. For example, that they're all teaching us the halacha of dam, of blood, by all four of the avodos, but it's not the case by shinoi ba'alim. That as Rashi says, it's only if he had in mind about to do the sprinkling in the wrong manner, not for the purpose of the owner. But if he thought about the shlita itself, not the shem ba'alim, then it wouldn't be disqualified. Meaning is when he does each of these actions, he has to have in mind when he's doing this action in order to disqualify that he's doing the zrika, not for the kapara of this owner. And also, yeshno achar misa, that shinoi kodshim is different in that it applies after death, meaning to say if he changed it, then a person consecrated an animal to be brought, and then he changed and then he died, and the animal had the wrong intent. His heirs have to bring the replacement korban, but not if it was shinoi ba'alim, meaning to say because they're not, after they die, they're no longer the owner of the korban, and yeshno b'tzibor kibiyachid. And also, we're going to say that shinoi kodshim applies to communal offering, but there's no shinoi ba'alim. And shinoi kodshim applies to both an individual offering and a communal offering, but shinoi ba'alim only applies to an individual offering. Va'afagav are on the top of Daled Amud Beis, and even though the tarti lav dafka, even though two of these cases are not really questions, they're lav dafka, they're not specific. Tarti mia dafka, two of them are actually strong questions and specific. What are the two that are lav dafka? Ma'ishna shinoi ba'alim d'huav psula b'gufa machshava ba'alma. What's your point that you said shinoi ba'alim is not an inherent disqualification, it's just a thought in general? Shinoi kodesh nami machshava ba'alma. Also, shinoi kodesh is also really just a thought. Ella, given the achshava pasal, hachinami given the achshava pasal. So just like thought disqualifies the shinoi ba'alim, also it should also just like thought disqualifies the shinoi kodshim, also by shinoi ba'alim. And also another one that's Rav Dafka is Rav Pinchas prayed to Rav shinoi ba'alim achar misa. He says there is this problem about shinoi ba'alim even after death. Teisa, but Teisa mia iko mefrach. But from the tarti mia iko mefrach. You still have the other two distinctions between shinoi kodshim and shinoi ba'alim that were raised, and so therefore you can't learn it out from the fact that you know by Zvicha to all of the other elements by shinoi ba'alim. So therefore we're still looking for how do we know this basic question that there is shinoi ba'alim by the other avodos. El amar Rashi, amar Kra, v'nirtza lo chaper alav. They say will atone for him, and it'll be an atonement for him, lo chavero, and not for his friend. And so therefore we see from here that the kapara needs to be done for the purpose of the owner and not for others. And so since the kapara is bizrika, if he sprinkled the blood for others, then it won't fulfill its obligation. Is this what this pasuk is meaning? Is teaching us? Don't we need it to teach us? Look at the Tanya. B'Shimon Omer Esh Alav Chayav B'Achriyuso. That She'enu Alav Eno Chayav B'Achriyuso. Doesn't that teach us this idea that if you say the word alai, that's considered to be like a neder, and if it was replaced, and if the animal is lost, you have to replace it. But if it was not, don't use the word alai in your formulation of the vow. It's called a nedava, and the animal doesn't need to be replaced. The Amar of Yitzchak Pravdimi, my time. Akiva Amar alai commanded Tanle Akasvi Dami. Because since he uses this word alai, it's like he put it on his shoulders. He assumed that responsibility. Ravashi Mibenirtza lo lechaper kamar. No, he learns it out from the fact that it could have said because it says lo lechaper and not lechaper chavero. So that's his drasha. So the Gemara says, okay, we learned now Zvicha and Zrika by Shinoi Balam applies. How do we know Kabbalah? Kabbalah Minah. And how do we know that you have Kabbalah by Shinoi Balam? If you want to say learn it out from Zvicha and Zrika, you can learn out from Zvicha and Zrika. Why? Zvicha and Zrika shekena avodah shechayev and oleh b'chutz. Because Zvicha and Zrika, if you do them outside the Azor, you're chayev misa. Unlike Kabbalah, Elamar Ravashi. I mean, you're chayev kares. Unlike Kabbalah, Elamar Ravashi Asya me'el nazir. So we learn out Kabbalah from the ram of the Nazir. The Nazir has to bring us shlamim. They'll say says zevach shlamim, which means also shem shlamim, that the shlamim, the ram of the Nazir needs to be done for the purpose of the shlamim. The main inyo is shinoi kodesh, and if we don't need it to teach us shinoi kodesh, because we already learned that by the shlamim, the naf goyim as we learned out. Ne'inyo is shinoi ba'alim, so apply it to shinoi ba'alim. So Amoy Ravachabar Abba Rava Ema Yas, but wait, maybe that's not the limud. Ema Yasa, when it says in the pasuk Yaseh Ayo Hashem, when it says Vesa Ayo Yaseh Zevach Shlamim LaHashem, maybe the word Yaseh is a klal, is a general rule, and Zevach is a prat, is a specific, and we have a principle, klal prat in the klal or mashma prat. It's only the specific. When doesn't that teach us maybe Zvicha in Midiachrina lo, that only the Zvicha needs to be done for the Balaam, but not the other avodos. But Gemara says no. Iksiv Yaseh Shlamim Zevach. If it would be written like that, Yaseh Shlamim Zevach Kidika Amris, that would be like you're saying. But Hashat Chsev Yaseh Zevach Shlamim. So since it uses the formulation of Yaseh Zevach Shlamim, that's what's called a Klal She'ino Mole. That's a general rule that was incomplete. Only after the prat is it complete. The call she'ino mole ain't done enough of the call prat. So therefore, we don't derive that the rule of call prat there. A different answer. Ravina Amar Olam done it. No, we would learn it out as there. But since the next word in the pasuk is Lashem, chazer a call. So it's really a call prat to call. It's and anything, and the rule by a general followed by a specific followed by a general is anything that's similar to the specific. It's not just the specific. So anything similar to the zvicha. So I'm going to Ravina Dami call Kamal call Balsar, but the first two, the generals are not the same. The first general is Yaseh, and the second one is Lashem. Kol Kama Marba Asios Visulo. The first generality includes the four essential aspects of the carbon, and that's it. The call Balsar call Lashem, and the second generality includes even those aspects of the carbon that are not the four main aspects. Afilu Shvicha Shirayim. And even the sprinkling of the remnants of the blood and the burning of the limbs on the altar. So it's not the same. So the Gemara says, but he taught that they don't have to be the same. That Rishmal taught, in this case, a call prat to call. And so since it's this type of call prat to call, we learn anything like the problem. Ma problem first avoda, but you don't lishma. Avkol avoda, but you don't lishma. So it's anything similar to the prat, anything similar to the zvicha. That's an avoda. Nor says, yeah, problem first avoda chayav and oleh. If that's the case, just like the specific here is zvicha, if you do it outside the courtyard, you're liable for kares. Avkol avoda chayav and oleh. Maybe the kabbalah and the halacha you also do chayav b'chutz kares. Shchitu zrika in kabbalah. So the Gemara says, and if that's the case. Maybe shchita is rika in Kabbalah, so we still don't have a proof that Kabbalah and halacha need to be done with Shema, or inami, or maybe ma problem for shtavar ta'an safon v'yeshno b'chatos apnimis avkol ta'an saf v'yeshno b'chatos apnimis, or maybe it's just about the fact that it's just teaching us that something that needs the northern part of the courtyard, i.e., the they're required. I mean, not the zrika, and also applies to chatos to panimis. Again, not the zrika. Shlita kabbalah in zrika lo. So the Gemara says, you're right. Iko meimer hachi, iko meimer hachi. You could say either one. Ushkuanein the yavoshnein. Since there's no way to determine, therefore it's coming to include both, and so therefore it's including also the kabbalah and the holacha. Or alternatively, you could say like this, that each one of them stands on their own. Or alternatively, how do we know Zrika by Shinoi Balam? Midar Rav Ashi Nafka. You learn that from Rav Ashi, who says, from the fact it says, as we said earlier. So it says, Ashkhan El Nazir. So we learn out the ram of the Nazir that we have to have that any of one of these Shinoi Balam disqualifies. Shar Shlomim Mino. And how do we know by all other Shlomim? El Nazir. If you want to say you learn out all other Shlomim from the ram of the Nazir, you can't. Now in the El Nazir, there are other karbanos that accompany the Nazir because he has to also bring a chatas and an o in addition to the Shlomim. The Gemara says, no, imke nichto shlamav, my shlamim, l'rabos kol shlamim. It includes all shlamim from the word shlamim. Askar shlamim, shar kol kachim and how do we know all other kachim? If you do shinoi balam, it's a problem. If you want to say, let's learn that from shlamim, you can. Mal shlamim shekain tun and smicha. Shlamim has unique laws, as we're going to. This is again a psticha for the whole Masechta. As we'll see, each carbon has their unique laws. Shlamim has smicha, which is the laying of the hands, and the sachem, the accompanying libations. To nufas chazav shok, the waving of the breast and the thigh. So how do we know to compare shlamim to all the other karbanos? It's based upon a pasuk. El amakra zos haTorah solol aminchal chatas olachem amigulim u'zevach hashlamim. Ikishan and kasav shlamim. Torah compares it to shlamim. Tell us about shlamim. Bein shinoi kodesh, bein shinoi balam, beinon l'shma. Afkol bein shinoi kodesh, bein shinoi balam, beinon l'shma. So it's to tell us that you need that shinoi balam and shinoi kodesh. They're problem by all the karbanos. Ema says the Gemara, so maybe it should be just like so the Gemara says maybe that this pasuk is needed to teach us that it's totally disqualified if it was slaughtered shlo shma. So why do we say that it's kosher? So the Gemara says, we have a different pasuk. Why does it say it's a neder. To teach us that if you didn't do it with the proper intent by shinoi kochim, it's still kosher. We need both psukim because of Rachmana Motzah. We just had a pasuk of Motzah. Lo yada b'mai kasav Rachmana zosatora. Lo yada b'mai. I wouldn't know which avodah. So therefore, because of Rahman Zosator, to teach the applies to all the karbanos. Because of Rahman Zosator, if we just had that pasuk, Ava Mini would pass. I would think it's totally disqualified. So because of Rahman So that's how we have the Gemara goes through every single one, and we have to stop now to study to do the slichos. Baruch Hashem.